Hello, this is Dr. Earle Williams again. I know that I had said on a previous video that bipolar disorder was going to be the last depression issue that I was going to deal with, but I've changed my mind and I've added one more. And this one will be the last one that I do on depression. Okay, what I'm going to do is I want to talk to you today about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, also known as PTSD. And this is a very common type of disorder and is affects a lot of people, and it can be very disorienting. So let's talk a little bit about that. Post-traumatic stress disorder, also known by the acronym of PTSD, is a type of stress and depression disorder that is the result of exposure to an extreme traumatic event involving a direct or indirect personal experience of an actual or threatening death issue, serious injury, or witnessing an event that involves death, injury, serious harm by a perpetrator on a family member, close personal friend, or relative. The victim's response involves intense fear, helplessness, or horror. Symptoms include persistent re-experiencing of the event associated with the trauma, persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the trauma, increased arousal, distress, or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of life functioning. These symptoms must persist for at least a month in order for this diagnosis to be given. This type of disorder can be the result of military combat, violent personal assault like rape, um, a physical attack, torture, incarceration, natural or man-made disasters, car accident, or anything that is out of the usual human experience. Persons with PTSD can have recurrent and intrusive recollections of the event. At times, they can experience a type of dissociative state, that is, a kind of out-of-body experience, where they will relive the horror, for a few seconds, hours, or even days. There can also be triggering events that will bring the trauma back to the individual, or be affected, or the individual can be affected by the anniversary of a traumatic event. I just had a person that I diagnosed with PTSD last week who was reliving the experience of her husband being murdered, and she ended up in a mental hospital. So yes, that can happen, and it doesn't matter how long ago that it happened. It can be 1 year, it could be 1 week, it can be 2 years, 10 years. It doesn't matter. It depends on the individual. The victim can have many of the symptoms of depression, along with the startle response and the fear, such as diminished interest in or participation in previously enjoyed activities, feeling detached, problems experiencing emotions associated with intimacy, as you might expect for someone that may have suffered from rape, tenderness and sexuality. They may have difficulty falling or staying asleep due to nightmares or night terrors. They may experience exaggerated startle responses, like um, a combat veteran who, after serving his country, is discharged from the military, comes home, and is in ordinary civilian circumstances, but hears a car backfire, and that startle response can put him into an exaggerated startle response that will make them duck for cover, as if they're reliving the the combat experience of being shot at by enemies. PTSD can also be known to cause irritability or outbursts of anger or difficulty concentrating or completing tasks. All of these things can lead to a diagnosis of major depressive disorder, substance abuse, panic disorder, anxiety disorder, phobia, or bipolar disorder. I remember the first client I diagnosed with PTSD. This was a young woman who worked at a dry cleaners, and as it happened, the dry cleaners was robbed, and she was the only employee there. She was robbed at gunpoint, you know. She had terrible nightmares and was afraid to return to the store. So when she came in to see me, we did some psychotherapy for about a month, you know. Um, because she had become paranoid and developed an anxiety disorder, you know, um, and was unable to return to that same facility to work again, you know. So after the treatment, she was able to return to work, return to the dry cleaners that she was at, but she would never be there. She would never allow herself to be there by herself, you know. Okay. There are other circumstances that are hardly ever discussed that can also cause post traumatic stress disorder. Working as a forensic clinical psychologist for the past 30 years, I'm required to do an in depth evaluation of defendants, which would include a diagnosis and an opinion as to the culpability of a defendant, and whether or not that they're competent to stand trial. That is the defendant, like I said, competent to stand trial? In other words, do they know enough about courtroom experience to aid their lawyer in mounting an adequate defense? And that's what I mean by being competent. The other thing is, does this individual have a mental illness? Now, if they have a mental illness, because this doesn't happen for everybody all the time when someone has a mental illness, does this mental illness have an impact on the person's criminal behavior for which they are arrested? In other words, was the individual sane or insane when they committed their crime? Um, that's what I do as a forensic clinical psychologist. In addition to testifying as an expert witness in court, usually I am asked to testify by the defense attorney. The majority of my clients have been and continue to be actually black males. But that is not the most important issue or similarity in the work that I do. Among all of my clients, whether they're black, white, male, or female, the vast majority of defendants I have evaluated have been sexually abused as children. While this appears to happen to both males and females, it's been my experience anyway, that female children are much more abused more intensely abused and more often abused, than males. I don't know of any study that connects sexual abuse to criminal activity, but there probably is some sort of connection, The other event never discussed is the impact of sexual abuse of men and women while incarcerated in prison, because men and women both can be raped in prison. And the issue becomes, how does that affect their behavior, their level of violence, their criminal activity? How does it affect their relationships with other people, after they're released? There's probably a lot of study that needs to be done here and a lot of treatment that needs to be done. I really think that every single person that has ever been incarcerated should have counseling or therapy when released. That's just my opinion. At any rate, I'm going to close on my PTSD presentation at this time. At any rate, you take care, be blessed, and hopefully I'll see you for the next video. Bye now.